Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev and devnursery.com and all the other really cool spots. And today what I want to do is just go over three, I think, of sort of the most, there's a lot of really cool CSS stuff that's come out this year, as far as like new features in CSS. I'm not going to go over every feature in this video, but I want to go over three of my favorite features for CSS in 2023 that I think, should start using. So, and that's going to be CSS layers, container queries, and nesting. Nesting definitely makes me very happy. So let's start there. Okay, let's start with nesting. So let's imagine that I wanted to target. So let's pretend I have this div here. I have this h1. It says hello. And then I have this h1 that says goodbye. Okay, so let's talk about how I would traditionally do this. So traditionally, let's say I wanted to style. Now, if I were to style the h1, so if I would just say, hey, h1 color, oops, this should be a style tag. There we go. But if I wanted to make this, let's say, green, and the problem with this is that it's going to target both h1s. So really, I only want the h1 that's inside of a div. So what I could do is I could choose the div selector and then do space and then do h1, and this targets an h1 that is a child of a div. And then if I do this and I say color red, that's only going to target that first h1 because it's a child of a div. Now let's say I also have an h2 here. Hello 2, and I want to target that as well. Okay, I could do another style and do like div h2 color blue, and this would be fine and good, but you can see here, like, eventually you have a lot of styles stacking in on each other, and I've rewritten div twice. Okay, so now I've written div twice, and then later on, if I want to have some rules on that div, so let's say I decide I want to make that div a flex box. Okay, basically I've had to write all these different rules, and you can see this is trying to really stack here. Okay, with CSS nesting, something that's already existed in things like Sass, but now you can actually do it in just raw CSS without having to use a preprocessor like Sass. So Sass, what you would do is you would write Sass code, Sass CSS in Sass, and then the preprocessor would read your Sass files and then convert them to compliant CSS. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. Okay, you can do this. Okay, so in that case, I could end up in the same place this way. Okay, so instead I would write the style for the div and say, hey, I want that div to be a flex. Okay, and then I can nest the styling for the h1 that's a child inside and say, hey, I want the h1 to be red, and I want the h2 to be blue. Okay, and essentially this would be the same thing, okay, except I'm not stacking so much. And the cool thing about nesting is that, one, I didn't have to write div multiple times. I only wrote it once instead of 3 times because I didn't have to write div space h1 and div space h2. I just basically expressed each rule. Okay, although display, the h1 rule isn't taking. So let me think about the y. Display flex, that's taken. Now let me see here. Does it matter? Am I able to do this here? If I take that out, does that make the nesting work? No. Well, it did work a second ago. So let's take a look. Okay, I think I know what I did wrong. I named the properties wrong. This should be color. Okay. So then this should be color as well. Let's see if that works. Okay, still not working the way it should work. So theoretically, this should be causing the h1 to be red, and then the other h2 should be becoming blue. But it's not doing that, and I have seen it work. So for example, like I have the scratch file right here where I did do it this way. So you see here the div with the title in there, and that did work. That did allow me to. So if I were to open that with live server, you see like that did style as red, even though the styling is listed, and again, it didn't apply it to the title class. So that begs the question. Okay, now when the spec was originally first added, you were supposed to have to use this sort of and selector. So in that case, that did make it red. Well, actually, let's go back to this one right here. And that time it works. Okay, so that time it works. So I must have an older version of Chrome that I haven't updated yet. Okay, because technically this should work now without the and selector. Okay, even though I did use it without the and selector over here. Okay, but you see sometimes you might need this and selector that kind of basically say, hey, it's this. This basically takes the place of the div. Instead of me writing div again, I can use the and selector. Although again, I should be able to do that without nowadays. So we go here, but at least at the moment, it didn't seem to be doing that. So it looks like if I'm using just a selector, okay, maybe not with a class, but with a selector and using an element selector, I still need to use the and symbol, at least right now when I'm using it. But a cool thing is, again, I can nest. It saves me the div. And the nice thing is, like, the way I've usually used nesting in the past is I'll have chunks of my website. Like I'll have a div that has like a class of section. And then basically I'll have a bunch of stuff inside that div. And then what I would do is I would create a class, style for that section. And then I would nest to target all the elements inside that section. So that way I know, hey, all my styling for that section of my website is going to be inside that section, that class wrapper. Okay, and I found that useful for myself. I was organizing and be able to go find where my particular styles are and just kind of thinking through my styling. Because I know that section, anything that's nested in that class, is only going to apply within that section of the website that's labeled under that class or that ID or something like that. Okay, so that's that story. Okay, so that's CSS nesting. I'm going to comment that out. Okay. Cool. Oh, that didn't generate the comment I wanted to generate. Okay. Yeah, oh well. I accidentally did it. The next thing is layers. Now, layers allows you to create different categories of styles that have different priorities. So, for example, I could say at layer 1, 2, 3. Okay, you can make up as many names as you want, put them in whatever order that you want. So now what I can do is I can now say at layer 1 and then style that layer. Okay. Although this should be 1. Okay, and then basically at layer 3 or 2. At layer 3. And the cool thing is that each of them kind of act as their own little layer. So basically the 2 layers on top of 1 and 3 layers on top of 3. So for example, if I were to style the H1, so I'll say in layer 1, I'm going to style H1 to be color red. The H1s become red. But what if I did that same styling in layer 2? Okay, and I said in layer 2, it becomes blue. Okay, now notice both H1s became blue because of the order that I put them in. Layer 2, since that came second, is higher priority. So any styling in layer 2 takes priority over styling in layer 1. So this allows you to kind of create semantic layers. So you can actually say, hey, I have a layer that's my reset, a layer that is just sort of my general like globals, and then like I have a layers that represent sort of specific sort of priorities. Okay, and you can organize your styles. And the cool thing is that this allows you to kind of reuse selectors in a way that allows you to have predictable priority. You can say, okay, hey, well, this is a high priority styling, so this should belong in this layer. Well, this is just kind of stuff that I want to apply as like my defaults in the second layer. So, I could do something like reset, basically styling that resets all my styling, 0 margin, 0 padding. I can do defaults. So these are like my default stylings, like default padding, default colors, default whatnot. And then, I can, and then do custom. And then this is where I would do sort of all my custom work for targeting different parts of the pages. And then I can think about my priority that way. And this kind of simplifies over having to think through like a dump specificity and all the specificity scores and whatnot. I can create sort of my own sort of logical priority system. So that's layers. CSS layers is pretty sweet. And the last one I'm going to do is container queries. So for that, I want to do a particular setup. Okay, so what I wanted to do is I want to have a div. Okay. And inside this div, I'm going to have 5. Well, actually, I'm going to have 2 more divs. Div of, actually, let me just reset this whole thing up. So what I'm going to want is a div of parent. And inside there, I want to have a div of child, and I want to have 5 of them. Okay. So let's first just give a natural styling for these. So I want to say, okay, class parent. What I wanted to do is have a width of 600 pixels. Okay, it's going to be by default display flex. And then the child, I want each of those to have a width of 100 pixels, a height of 200 pixels, and a background color of brown. Okay. And then I want to make sure I do a flex wrap, so that way those all get squished on one line. Flex wrap. Let's say wrap. Okay. And let's think about that. Oh, I made these height 200 pixels, so let's make that height 100 pixels. Okay, width 600 pixels. We'll make that 400 pixels. Okay, and we'll say 410 actually. And what I want, and then flex wrap. And I'm going to want to give these like a margin of like 2 pixels, so that way you can see the different squares. Okay, so right now you can see that there's these 4 squares and they wrap. Okay, now what I'm going to do is below this, I am going to have a input of type equals number. Okay, that has a name. That's fine. We'll just leave it at that. And then a button. Hello, or resize. Because basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow you to resize the width of this parent so you can kind of see how this works. Okay. Because usually, well, actually, let's finish setting this up first. So let's do some JavaScript here. And I want a const button, which is going to equal document.query selector, the button. And then we're going to say const the input, because there's only one input, document.query selector, the input. Okay, and what I want to do is make it when you click on the button, dot add event listener. Okay. Whenever you click on the listener, what it's going to do, and we should target that, we also going to want that parent div, const parent equals document.query selector. And we're going to target the thing that has a class of parent. Okay. And essentially what I want to happen is at any time you click on the button, the parent dot style dot width is going to equal input dot value. Okay. So like right now it's like 400, but if I were to make this like 500 and I click resize, you don't see it, but it happened. If I make this like 300, okay, I'm not quite sure if that's doing what I think it's doing. Input dot value. Okay, I think I need to do that. Oh yeah, because I need to do that as like text. So let's wrap this in some backticks. And let's do some interpolation. And it's going to be whatever that number is, pixels. Okay. And I want to just do a console log just to make sure that this button has been clicked. Okay, I'm going to open up my DevTools. And we're going to say, and then actually I'm going to change the spacing here on the flex wrap just so we can see it. Justify content, space, between. Okay, so right now it's taking up that width, so it fills it up. But now let's see here. If I change it to, let's say, 600. Okay, so see that button is not clicking because we don't see the console log in there. So I just got to adjust that. Button, why is that not add event listener, console.log click. So let me console.log button, make sure that the button variable is what I think it is. Oh wait, there's an error there. Add event listener on event.target. That's an interesting. Add event listener. Oh, I forgot to specify click. Oh. It's a click event. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's go to 500. Okay, and you see I'm adjusting the width. 200. Okay. So now what I want to do is do what's called a container query. Okay, so basically what you do here is you do at container. It's like a media query where you sit, but instead of it being based on the size of the screen, it's based on the size of the containing element. So in this case, the child would be affected by the size of the parent. So the width of the parent will say. So we'll say minimum width 300 pixels. So basically this would take effect whenever the width of that is below 300 pixels. Okay, and then basically what will happen is that the child elements, I'm going to make their width 20 pixels, height 20 pixels. So essentially what's going to happen is in this situation, the behavior of those child elements are going to change because their containers size has changed, not because the screen has changed size. So you notice I don't have to drag my screen to make this happen. Okay, so if I go 200, I resize. Okay, should make those smaller. Okay, but I don't think it did. Yeah, there's still 100 by 100. Okay. Okay, so what I need to fix here is that technically this doesn't work exactly like a media query. So instead of minimum width, max width like a media query, I would just express it as a Boolean. So I would say width is less than 300, like that. Okay, so now if I were to make this 200, okay, still didn't quite have the effect that I want. Okay, let me think about that as width less than 300. Yes, it should be on the container. So let me go to elements just to double check. Go to my body. Go to this div of parent. Yeah, it is less than 200. Okay, and let's take a look at the. Let's open that up. And the child doesn't seem to be seeing the container query. So let me see if I can adjust it. Okay, so taking a quick look at the docs, one thing I forgot to do is that we need to add a container type property to the container so it realizes it's a container. So I got to add this property on the parent, container type. Okay. And that's going to be inline size. And that just allows the container query to kind of work. So let's see if it works now. Okay, so if I were to make this 200 pixels width, we should see smaller squares. Okay, and still not quite. Still not quite. So let's see here. Let's keep comparing the docs. Okay, I have my container query right here at container. Okay, width is less than 300, which it was. Oh, it's 300 pixels. My bad. 300. I keep forgetting the pixels today. Okay, so let's try that again. 200. And now that worked. Okay, so you notice that now the styling changes based on the size of the container. This is huge, okay, when you really think about it, because now what you can do is that when you're trying to do responsive styling, you don't have to just think about, okay, what is the screen size this way? What if they size the screen this way? You can just think about how does that particular chunk of the website look like based on the particular container. So that way, even if they're on a desktop environment, but for some reason the orientation changes or different things happen, you can just make sure that that particular part of the page looks the way it looks based on sort of the container's size. Okay, so this makes life a lot easier when it comes to responsive styling. It makes all sorts of new possibilities because basically you have times where you can adjust elements on the page because you're interacting with the element, but you're not changing the viewport size. And oftentimes what you'd have to do is like remove or replace the element, or use JavaScript to manipulate the properties of the element every time you adjusted the size of the screen. Now you can kind of do a lot of that in your CSS and avoid having to bring JavaScript into it too often. So that's awesome. I mean, the amount you can do in CSS without having to resort to JavaScript nowadays is growing exponentially, which is pretty sweet. My name is Alex Merced. These are a few of the new CSS properties. So as you can see, they're pretty new. I'm not super secondhand nature with them yet, but these are the kind of things that are going to become staples of like future styling and things that you should be familiar with. So have a great day and enjoy.